Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Shravanam Diaries Podcast.
Continuing to read Bhagavad Gita as it is, the book by His Divine Grace Abhayacharanaravindra Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga, Text 18. Yada viniyatam chittam atmanyeva vatishthate nispraha sarvakamebhyo yukta ityuchyate tada. When the yogi, by practice of yoga, disciplines his mental activities and becomes situated in transcendence, devoid of all material desires, he is said to be well established in yoga. Purport. The activities of the yogi are distinguished from those of an ordinary person by his characteristic cessation from all kinds of material desires, of which sex is the chief. A perfect yogi is so well disciplined in the activities of the mind that he can no longer be disturbed by any kind of material desire. This perfectional stage can automatically be attained by persons in Krishna consciousness, as stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam 9.4.18-20. Savaimana Krishna Padaravindayor Vachamsi Vaikuntha Gunanuvarnane Karau Harir Mandiram Arjanadisho Shrutim Chakarachuta Satkathodaye Mukundalingalaya Darshane Drishau Tadbritya Gatra Sparshenga Sangamam Granam Chatatpada Saroja Saurabhei Shrimat Tulasya Rasanam Tadarpite Padau Hare Kshetra Padanu Sarpane Shiro Rishikesha Padabhivandane Kamam Chadasya Natu Kama Kamyaya Yathottama Shloka Janashraya Rati. Quote. King Ambarisha first of all engaged his mind on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Then, one after another, he engaged his words in describing the transcendental qualities of the Lord, his hands in mopping the temple of the Lord, his ears in hearing of the activities of the Lord, his eyes in seeing the transcendental forms of the Lord, his body in touching the bodies of the devotees, his sense of smell in smelling the scents of the lotus flowers offered to the Lord, his tongue in tasting the tulsi leaf offered at the lotus feet of the Lord, his legs in going to places of pilgrimage and the temple of the Lord, his head in offering obeisances unto the Lord, and his desires in executing the mission of the Lord. All these transcendental qualities, all these transcendental activities are quite befitting a pure devotee. Unquote. This transcendental stage may be inexpressible subjectively by the followers of the impersonalist path, but it becomes very easy and practical for a person in Krishna consciousness, as is apparent in the above description of the engagements of Maharaja Ambarisha. Unless the mind is fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord by constant remembrance, such transcendental engagements are not practical. Not practical. In the transcendental, devotional service of the Lord, therefore, these prescribed activities are called archana, or engaging all the senses in the service of the Lord. The senses and the mind require engagements. Simple abnegation is not practical. Therefore, for people in general, especially those who are not in the renounced order of life, transcendental engagement of the senses and the mind are described above in the perfect process for transcendental achievement, which is called yukta in the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so these transcendental engagements, as described above, is the perfect process. Archana, engaging all the senses. Interesting, right? Unless the mind is fixed, such transcendental engagements are not practical. At the same time, simple abnegation is not practical. Therefore, we are in the process of practice of such engagements, even though we may not have strong feeling to do them at the moment. Okay. Text 19. Yatha diponi vatasto nengate sopamasmrita yogino yata chittasya yunjato yogam atmana. As a lamp in a windless place does not waver, so the transcendentalist, whose mind is controlled, remains always steady in his meditation on the transcendent self. Purport. A truly Krishna-conscious person, always absorbed in transcendence, in constant, undisturbed meditation on his worshipable Lord, is as steady as a lamp in a windless place. Text 20 to 23. Okay. Yatro paramate chittam nirudham yoga sevaya yatra chaiva atmanatmanam pasyanatmani tushyati sukham adyantikam yati tad buddhi grahyam atindriyam vidyatra na chaivayam stitaschalati tatvataha yam labdva cha param labham manyate nadikam tata yasmin sthito na dukhena guruna pi vichalyate tam vidya dukha samyoga viyogam yoga samgitam. In the stage of perfection, called trance or Samadhi, one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of greatest calamity. I'm so sorry. Greatest difficulty. Similar but different. One is never shaken, even in the midst of greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. Such a beautiful verse, isn't it? Such a beautiful verse. Look at all these wonderful things. ability to see the self by the pure mind, relish and rejoice in the self, situated in boundless transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses, and then you never depart from the truth, and you think there is no greater gain, never shaken, even if there's greatest calamity, and this is actual freedom. Sounds wonderful, isn't it? Sounds very, very attractive. Okay, purport. By practice of yoga, one becomes gradually detached from material concepts. This is the primary characteristic of the yoga principle. And after this, one becomes situated in trance or samadhi, which means that the yogi realizes the supersoul through transcendental mind and intelligence, without any of the misgivings of identifying the self with the superself. Yoga practice is more or less based on the principles of the Patanjali system. Some unauthorized commentators try to identify the individual soul with the supersoul, and the monists think this to be liberation. But they do not understand the real purpose of the Patanjali yoga system. There is an acceptance of transcendental pleasure in the Patanjali system, but the monists do not accept this transcendental pleasure out of fear of jeopardizing the theory of oneness. The duality of knowledge and knower is not accepted by the non-dualist. But in this verse, transcendental pleasure realized through transcendental senses is accepted. And this is corroborated by Patanjali Muni, the famous exponent of the yoga system. The great sage declares in his Yoga Sutras 3.34, Purushartha shunyanam gunanam pratiprasava kaivalyam svarupa pratishtava chitti shaktir iti. This chitti shakti, or internal potency, is transcendental. Purushartha means material religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and at the end, the attempt to become one with the Supreme. This oneness with the Supreme is called Kaivalyam by the monists. But according to Patanjali, this Kaivalyam is not an internal or transcendental potency by which the living entity becomes aware of his constitutional position. In the words of Lord Chaitanya, this state of affairs is called Cheto Darpana Marjanam, or clearance of the impure mirror of the mind. This clearance is actually liberation, or Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam. The theory of nirvana, also preliminary, corresponds with this principle. In the Bhagavatam 2.10.6, this is called Svarupena Vyavasthiti. The Bhagavad Gita also confirms this situation in this verse. After nirvana, or material cessation, there is the manifestation of spiritual activities or devotional service to the Lord, known as Krishna consciousness. In the words of the Bhagavatam, Svarupena Vyavasthiti, this is the, in quotes, real life of the living entity, unquote. Maya, or illusion, is the condition of spiritual life contaminated by material infection. Liberation from this material infection does not mean destruction of the original eternal position of the living entity. Patanjali also accepts this by his words Kaivalyam Swarupa Pratishta Va Chiti Shaktir Iti. This Chiti Shakti, or transcendental pleasure, is real life. This is confirmed in the Vedanta Sutra 1.1.12 as Anandamayo Bhyasat. This natural transcendental pleasure is the ultimate goal of yoga and is easily achieved by execution of devotional service or bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga will be vividly described in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. In the yoga system as described in this chapter, there are two kinds of samadhi called Sampragyata Samadhi and Asampragyata Samadhi. When one becomes situated in the transcendental position by various philosophical researches, he is said to have achieved Sampragyata Samadhi. In the Asampragyata Samadhi, there is no longer any connection with mundane pleasure, for one is then transcendental to all sorts of happiness derived from the senses. When the yogi is once situated in that transcendental position, he is never shaken from it. Unless the yogi is able to reach this position, he is unsuccessful. Today's so-called yoga practice, which involves various sense pleasures, is contradictory. A yogi indulging in sex and intoxication is a mockery. Even those yogis who are attracted by the siddhis, perfections, in the process of yoga are not perfectly situated. If yogis are attracted by the byproducts of yoga, then they cannot attain the stage of perfection, as is stated in this verse. Persons, therefore, indulging in the make-show practice of gymnastic feats or siddhis should know that the aim of yoga is lost in that way. It's lost. The best practice of yoga in this age is Krishna consciousness, which is not baffling. A Krishna conscious person is so happy in his occupation that he does not aspire after any other happiness. There are many impediments, especially in this age of hypocrisy, to practicing Hatha Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. But there is no such problem in executing Karma Yoga or Bhakti Yoga. As long as the material body exists, one has to meet the demands of the body, namely, eating, sleeping, defending, and mating. But a person who is in pure Bhakti Yoga or in Krishna consciousness does not arouse the senses while meeting the demands of the body. Rather, he accepts the bare necessities of life, making the best use of a bad bargain, and enjoys transcendental happiness in Krishna consciousness. Wow. Okay, let's just take a moment and understand what we've just read. Prabhupada says that as long as the material body exists, we have to meet the demands of the body, meaning eating, sleeping, defending, and mating. Demands. We have to meet them if we have a material body. But a person who is in pure Bhakti Yoga or in Krishna consciousness does not arouse the senses while meeting the demands of the body. This is two different things. meeting the demands of the body and arousing the senses. Two different things. Rather, he accepts the bare necessities of life. Bare necessities of life, making the best use of a bad bargain. And enjoys transcendental happiness and Krishna consciousness. Okay, next, he is callous toward incidental occurrences such as accidents, disease, scarcity, and even the death of a most dear relative. But he is always alert to execute his duties in Krishna consciousness or bhakti yoga. Accidents never deviate him from his duty. Wow. Nice. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita 2.14, Agamapayino nityas tam stitikshasva bharata. He endures all such incidental occurrences because he knows that they come and go and do not affect his duties. In this way, he achieves the highest perfection in yoga practice. About a week ago, was it last Thursday, I was translating Brahminical Culture and Ethics at Mayapur Academy, and Premanjana Prabhu was speaking on this topic about how executing Krishna consciousness and practicing even when we face painful situations, and how understanding that Krishna, he is kind and he is not unjust, and basically like he was expanding on this, what we've just read, that accidents never deviate a devotee or a Brahmin from his duty, a Vaishnava. He's not deviated in these painful situations. He is always practicing that surrender at all times, in all circumstances. And it really like opened, I know that I can't like express word for word, especially in that way that Prabhu explained it, but it really touched my heart how he explained this concept that like this is the time when it's a test for us. It's easy to surrender when everything is going right, but when everything goes wrong, instead of pointing fingers, instead of blaming, instead of being a victim, like, are we able to really surrender in that way? And here Prabhupada says he is callous toward incidental occurrences. And he says that they come and go, and they do not affect his duties. Tam stitiksha svabharata, titiksha. He is just... I mean, this is a level, it's a higher level of understanding and realization, but it's definitely something that all of us have the opportunity to practice in our life, because we all meet such circumstances, such accidents in our life. So I'm really grateful how, devotees, they it's a very different thing when you read, and then when devotees, they also share their realizations according to different topics, and it really gives an impact and gives a new understanding, and not just intellectual understanding, but that kind of you get a new feeling regarding the topic. And yeah, Jai. So I wish you to never deviate from your bhakti yoga at all places, at all circumstances. And let's go back to the beginning of the verse, so that we all be having the ability to see ourselves with a pure mind, relish and rejoice in the self, situated in boundless transcendental happiness through transcendental senses, realized through transcendental senses, never depart from the truth, feel and understand that there is no greater gain, never shaken, even in the midst of greatest difficulty. And this is the actual freedom. Such an important verse we read today, such an important verse. I mean, I say it so many times during the reading of this Bhagavad Gita, like in these episodes, that this verse, such a crucial verse, such an important. I mean, every single verse in Bhagavad Gita, you can speak about it for hours. Like the way that we are reading through this, I feel that I don't give enough attention, but it's not the format of this podcast for me to speak, and maybe I don't even have so many deep realizations as well. But basically, if we go into this and we can really speak about every single verse, every single word of the verse for hours and hours, and this is the beauty of Bhagavad Gita. It's so deep, and it speaks about everything, and it's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much for tuning in today. The book links, previous episodes timeline, and biography of the author can be found on shravanamdiaries.com. The link is in the description, and we shall see you tomorrow. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.